Oh, welcome back to the channel, my AKAPADers. Peter A DeLuca here, AKAPAD69, and stay with me. Known throughout Philadelphia, PA, Europe, and the vast multiverse, the Wildstorm universe, the Top Cal verse, as your eclectic one. I have a stack of comics here. I have my morning coffee. So this video for Wildstorm Wednesday, and it's also linked to what should have been yesterday's Top Cal Tuesday, is about the Huntsman. Here's a great image of him. Now, as I'm talking to you, right, we're going to have Chris Claremont. We're going to have the character up next to me, because I just want both things in your face as I'm discussing all of this with you. But these are the books, okay? We have a nice stack here of his collaboration. So Chris Claremont enters into the creator-owned space. He comes in now, post X-Men, he did Sovereign 7 with DC Comics with Dwayne Turner. Dwayne Turner later gets hired by Todd McFarlane for Curse to Spawn and does some very nice Image Comics work, by the way. But post Chris Claremont, post Uncanny X-Men, and post Adjectiveless X-Men, the highest selling comic book of all time, we don't get much. And the wild thing is, as comic book fans, as comic book fandom, we give everything to Chris Claremont. We always reference, and I say we because I'm kind of talking in the platitude of the consciousness, okay? But everyone just says, we just say, the Uncanny X-Men, Chris Claremont is one of the greatest written runs of all time. It's one of the greatest runs of characters, situations. He's the one that helped round out Wolverine's personality. Everything he did with Nightcrawler, everything he did with Storm, Colossus falling in love with Kitty Pryde. All of these things we attribute to Chris Claremont. But then the modern age happens, right? The Image Comics era happens. He loses his job with Uncanny X-Men, and Marvel, and pretty much spirals. He was originally supposed to be a part of Image Comics. This character here, Huntsman, was supposed to be drawn by Wells Portacio, and he was going to be under the Jim Lee Wildstorm Homage Studios banner. Chris Claremont was going to be in the same offices as Mark Silvestri and Jim Lee. This is why we pair, and we've been doing a lot of back-to-back episodes and explorations of Top Cal Tuesday and Wildstorm Wednesday, because that studio itself, as detailed on this channel, fascinating. The talent that came through there, the separation, Mark Silvestri eventually moving out of that studio space, really solidifying Top Cal Tuesday, or Top Cal Productions. But Chris Claremont was supposed to be amongst this core, and it doesn't happen. So he does Sovereign 7 with DC Comics. He does Aliens vs. Predator, or Aliens and Predator team up to become friends for Dark Horse. He does his own novels. He goes into novelization, and we kind of see this rise. And very similar, Peter David was doing the same stuff. Now, Peter David was somewhat in and out of the creator-owned stuff. He did stuff for Epic, but he was doing novels, working in media, working on the greatest Hulk run of all time. But then we actually read Chris Claremont. And if you're getting into Chris Claremont, let's just say recently, let's say because of this channel, you come in with the idea that Chris Claremont has done no wrong. You come into the idea that Chris Claremont is absolute perfection, that he is potentially the greatest comic book writer of all time. And I'll be honest, a lot of what I think of Chris Claremont cracked during there was this X-Men documentary about him. And I just thought it was a complete fluff piece. Garbage documentary. Very little insight, honestly. And we go into like some of his interviews, and we listen to him. And he just talks and talks and talks. He talks himself into a complete circle. And then we get into the lost plot lines, how many significant plot lines and ideas and setups that were completely ignored during his time, not just on X-Men, but the other mutant books. And we look into his other work, right? Sovereign 7, Aliens vs. Predator, and these right here. And I went through, like, his Cyber Force issues of this is absolute. It's unreadable. It really is. We have jumps in location. We have leaps in plot. Huntsman, here he is on the cover of Cyber Force issue 10. A completely uninteresting character. And it was hyped. It was hyped that Chris Claremont is coming back with Mark Silvestri. He's coming back with Jim Lee. And he has a new character for us. Huntsman is, we don't even know the gimmick for the character. We can read 3 whole issues of Cyber Force where he is predominantly featured and has pages and monologue and exposition and interaction with these characters, and we get nothing. We get zero. And then we get into the Wildcats, and Jim Lee gives them an extra issue. He's in with 4 issues of Wildcats, and the same thing happens. And it makes us think that the plots that Chris Claremont was handing out for X-Men, and I'm even talking about Paul Smith, the JR stuff, the entire run, that the plots were very well written. They were well thought out. And then the artist comes in and does the actual comic book. It makes us understand the argument of John Byrne. John Byrne wanted control over X-Men. John Byrne, in my opinion, should have had control over X-Men. He was the talent of that. And we go through these eras of the X-Men. The eras of the X-Men existed because there was enough of a comic book market to support it. If Chris Claremont's work for the X-Men was in today's books, where we need sales to stay on the stands, it wouldn't fly. Because I believe this, the market dictated the greatness of Chris Claremont. It wasn't really his work, because no one in their right mind would read these issues and say that Chris Claremont can write comics. Chris Claremont comes back. He comes back in the 2000s with a title called Extreme X-Men, where he picks up some of the plot threads from previously, but X-Men at this time, as a franchise, evolved. It evolved into the Black Leather post-movie Grant Morrison era, and there wasn't really even a place for him. And then how many times we have Chris Claremont return to X-Men, and none of you out there can cite anything that he's done. But we're addicted to the Outback era. We're addicted to the giant size X-Men era. We're addicted to him and Jim Lee. I view Chris Claremont the same way how I view someone like Karl Malone. See, if there wasn't a Michael Jordan, Karl Malone could have been the Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan robbed Karl Malone of 2 championships. Without the Bulls, without Michael Jordan, Karl Malone could have won 6 titles. He could have won maybe 6 straight titles. How about that for something wild? Karl Malone could have been the individual to drive the merchandise. He could have starred in Space Jam. But we don't really know. We like to hypothesize. But Karl Malone's career it's about the era. Michael Jordan's era was so magnified, someone else could have been in that spot. Now, they may not have been Jordan, but they would have been more popular. Charles Barkley, more popular. Karl Malone, more popular. Basketball was at its height. It was at its rise. It had the most eyeballs ever. someone was going to be in Michael Jordan's position with or without Michael Jordan being a part of the Chicago Bulls. It's easy to play with a lead, guys. It's easy. So we know in sports, some teams, some coaches, some players are built to have a lead. When they come from behind, when they're down, we can almost walk out of the room and get on with our day or our night. This is how I look at Chris Claremont. Chris Claremont walked into the X-Men and he had a lead, and we were in an era, a time of Marvel editorial, where they let John Cockrum just fill that book up with new characters and new costumes, ones of which he intended for his own use or someone else's use. He went into his sketchbook and gave us the incredible design of Colossus, the incredible design of Nightcrawler, and the list goes on and on. Chris Claremont walked into a good team. They were in the Michael Jordan era. Could anyone else come in and write the X-Men? Potentially, yes. I would like to say yes. Does Chris Claremont need a lead? Yes. He had so much momentum. He had a lot of good faith. He had a lot of good wiggle room. He was able to work in that book. He had the characters, the character designs, the personalities, and you might want to say, could anyone have made Uncanny X-Men work post Giant Size X-Men? You kind of want to say yes. Now, would it worked as well? We can debate that. Chris Claremont needs a lead. He needs to be in the Michael Jordan era. Those are the two scenarios that define his Uncanny X-Men work, because when he leaves Uncanny X-Men, we get questionable moves, questionable work that never resonated, work that was never impactful. We're living in the Chris Claremont myth. We're living in the Chris Claremont world where we're happy, we're okay. Where for some reason we have to give this guy more accolades than anyone else, and I don't understand why. Even when you give him enough rope, he will hang himself. Even when he goes on and on about his work and his own stories, and it's gibberish, zero insight, zero connective tissue, and when he speaks of his books and his stories, we want to get closer. We want to be more connected to them. We even want to be more connected to Sovereign 7. We want to be more connected to his work on Aliens, Predator. But we're not, because the stories aren't quite there. And his collaborators, again, the Michael Jordan era. Michael Jordan had Karl Malone to fight through. Chris Claremont had some of the greatest artists in comic book history to fight through. He had talent upon talent, unstoppable talent, talent that would have taken his plots and done amazing things with it, and they did. They gave us new characters, new designs, like interesting environments, interesting situations, covers that could move those books. These are the things that the artist does. And very little do we have examples of a comic book writer taking his writing and transporting it out of comics. Very few examples of it being good. Peter David, his Star Trek books are amazing. I recommend anyone reading a Peter Davis Star Trek book. Peter Davis' work on Babylon 5, amazing. Neil Gaiman has drifted out of comic books and given us amazing prose. Chris Claremont never really quite did that. I tried reading Sundowner. I tried reading some of his books, and they're okay. They're just nice, fun, commercial sci-fi. I wouldn't quite say that they were as good as American Gods or Neverwhere from Neil Gaiman. So guys, Chris Claremont, we're just saying it before we get into these books. Chris Claremont is somewhat of a farce. I'm sorry. I read a lot of his work. I want to say, up to a certain point, I read everything that the guy wrote. And they're good books. But what he does outside of some of these books mostly the X-Men books. It's questionable. And I'm thinking about during it when Alien Romulus starts getting closer, we might do his Aliens Predator run, because there is stuff of note to mention in that. But again, his collaborators, the people he worked with, weren't as good as some of the ones that came up through Marvel Comics, Marvel Editorial, and the X-Men offices. And these are a lot of the opinions that this channel has now, because again, we read the books. We're dedicated to reading the books. Chris Claremont exposes himself with his Wildcats and his Cyber Force collaborations. So, before we get into the next Top Cow Tuesday, and before we get into the next Wildstorm Wednesday, we're going to go into his Huntsman work. And then we're going to pretty much reset Top Cow Tuesday and Wildstorm Wednesday, because we'll be kind of done with this collaboration where we're kind of doing, some of the similarities of the publishing schedule of those two entities. Top Cow Tuesday will be more Top Cow coming up. Wildstorm Wednesday will be more Wildstorm Wednesday coming up. And if I'm crazy, guys, let me know what other Chris Claremont works like really measure up to those Uncanny years. Let me know. What am I missing? Am I crazy? Am I reading this stuff wrong? Let me know.